Today's lesson is Unit 11, Lesson 7, Vertical Shifting of Sinusoidal Graphs. So this is textbook pages 372 and 373, and it would be helpful if you had two colored pencils or pens, preferably red or blue, red and blue rather. And your homework is page 374 and 375. Any graph having a sine or cosine function is known as a sinusoidal. These graphs can be stretched vertically, as we saw in our last lesson, Lesson 6. Other transformations can occur as well. Today we'll explore graphs of the equations of the form y equals a sine x plus c and y equals a cosine x plus c. Remember, the capital A is a vertical stretch on the graph. Let's see what adding a constant c to an equation does to the graph. Exercise number 1, consider the function f of x equals sine x plus 3. A, the graph of y equals sine x is shown. Okay, so here we have the graph of y equals sine x. Sine here starts at the origin, goes up to the max of 1, down to the x-axis, down to min of -1, back up to the x-axis. So this is one complete cycle of sine from 0 to 2 pi. And then from -pi to 0, we have a second complete cycle of sine. Back to this. How would it be shifted to produce the graph of f of x? Well, if f of x equals sine x plus 3, you know what that plus 3 does, right? Remember from our transformations in Unit 7. The plus 3 outside the function would be a vertical shift up 3. On the grid to the right is the basic sine curve, y equals sine x. On the same grid, sketch the graph of f of x. So f of x is y equals sine x plus 3. So we would take each point and shift it up 3, move it up 3. That's the wrong place. Belongs there. Do the same on the other side for our negative values of x. It's the same as if I had taken the like the x-axis here with the graph attached to it and picked it up and just shifted it up 3 units. Now, I want to draw what is called the midline. What's in the middle of our max and our min, right? Midway between our max and our min is this right here. So just draw that with a dotted line. And if I go back to our original sine function here, its midline, the middle between the maximum point and the minimum point, would be the x-axis. What's the equation of the x-axis? It's y equals 0. What's the equation of the dotted horizontal line we've drawn above? It's y equals 3. How does that relate to our equation of f of x? It's plus 3 at the end. So this midline is what it's called, and it'll be explained or typed out on the top of the next page. This midline is y equals whatever the c value is. In this case, y equals 3. That's something you're going to memorize. In exercise number 2, it says consider the function y equals 2 cosine x plus 1. We are not using our calculator to sketch it. Give the equation of a horizontal line that this curve rises and falls 2 units above. Sketch this line on the graph. Okay, so let me say that 2 is our A value, the 1 is our C value. So our midline, first thing we're going to do is draw our midline. Draw the midline, y equals 1. You can draw it solid if you want. I just prefer to draw it dotted or dashed. We want to graph this. Now, this is a cosine curve. The A value is 2, so that means it would start 2 units above the midline. So from here, count 2 units above, that's where our cosine curve starts. At 2 pi, it will end at that height. And midway between, it will be 2 units below our midline. And then, oh, this is I just noticed this here, I apologize. This should not be a 2 pi. And let me just double check. This should be right. This should be a pi over 2. And this is 3 pi over 2, the same as above. Right? It's 3 pi over 2. That threw me off there. Okay, so where was I? Oh, so now at pi over 2, it's going to cross our midline, and 3 pi over 2. And now from 0 to, yeah, this is off. This is supposed to be negative 2 pi. This is correct. This is not. This is negative pi. This is negative pi over 2. Okay, but anyway, we know that cosine is symmetric with the y-axis, so we can simply reflect these points over the y-axis. State the range of this trigonometric function in interval notation. Well, remember, range is lowest to highest, low to high. And the lowest point is negative 1, and the highest point is 3. We don't need the graph to get that, right? The range is going to be the C value. If you think of this, right? If I take my C value of 1 and I rise up 2, that'll put us at 3. And if we take our C value of 1 and go down 2, it'll put us at negative 1. So our range is going to be C minus the absolute value of A, and then C plus the absolute value of A. So for range, you can think of it as C plus or minus the absolute value of A. For curves that have the general form y equals a sine x plus c and y equals a cosine x plus c, the value c is called the midline, or average value of the trig function. It is the height or horizontal line that the sinusoidal curve rises and falls above and below by a distance of absolute value of A. And recall that the absolute value of A is the amplitude, is known as the amplitude. So let's put up here our midline is y equals c. And it's the average between the max and the min. So C is going to equal, it's an average between the max and the min. You take the max plus the min and divide it by 2. Exercise number 3, sketch and label the functions y equals 4 sine x minus 2 and y equals negative 2 cosine x plus 3 on the grid below. We're going to do these without our calculator. Then state the ranges of each of the equations in interval notation. Okay, so I'm going to do sine in red pen or pencil and cosine in blue. So first sine. Start with draw the midline. That's our C value, which is in this case is y equals negative 2. I'm going to pause this and see because I'm noticing again the scale here, these numbers are incorrect. So hopefully I'll be back in just one moment. Okay, so I do apologize. Yeah, there's typos here. So let's cross this off. This is supposed to be pi over 2. Pi is fine, and this is 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi is fine. This should be negative pi over 2, negative pi, negative 3 pi over 2 is correct, negative 2 pi. And I believe that's the same is true with the homework. Yeah, so I'm just going to go to page 374, the homework page. And if you would change the scale there, correct those values. So this is page 374, the homework page. So this pi over 2 is correct. Pi is correct. This should be 3 pi over 2. And 2 pi is correct. This is negative pi over 2, negative pi, negative 3 pi over 2 is correct. This should be negative 2 pi. And when you do these problems, if you can try to color code them, when you do them on the one grid here, do blue, red, and then your regular writing utensil. Or actually, I think I'm probably going to use green. Blue, red, green. The same with number 2. The pi over 2 is correct. Pi is correct. This is not pi. This is 3 pi over 2. 2 pi is correct. This is negative pi over 2, negative pi. Negative 3 pi over 2 is correct. That's a negative 2 pi. Blue and red. And you draw those graphs. Okay, again, I apologize for that. Now back to where we were. So we want to start by drawing the midline. So I'm back on page 373 of the notes. So drawing the midline of y equals negative 2. And this is a sine graph. And just our y equals sine theta, let's say, would start at the origin. All right. In this case, sine is going to start on the midline for y equals 4 sine x minus 2. It starts on the midline. And then it would go up, back on the midline, fall back down, and one complete cycle would be back on the midline. Okay, so we're starting on the midline, and at 2 pi it ends up where it started at. And midway between, it's on the midline. So I usually do start, end of one cycle, and then middle of the cycle. Now the 4 tells us that we're going to go 4 units above the midline. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it rises 4 units above the midline and then 4 units below the midline. And plotting the points from 0 to negative 2 pi. We've got these 3. And now it's symmetric with the origin, so it wants to come down to negative. This is actually negative 6 here. And at negative 3 pi over 2 radians, it would be up at positive 2. And we have it color-coded, so I think we're good with that. But if you don't have colors, then please make sure you label this y equals 4 sine x minus 2. What's the range? The range is the c value plus or minus the absolute value of a. So in this case, again, if I think of starting at the midline negative 2, and if I go up 4, I'm at positive 2. From negative 2, if we go down 4, we're at negative 6. So negative 6 to 2 is the range. Now let's use the blue pencil or pen for the cosine. Right? So we start with the midline, the c value. Our midline is y equals 3. 1, 2, 3. Remember our basic cosine curve. Our basic cosine would start off the midline or off the x-axis. And actually it started at whatever the a value was. It would be 0a. But we have this vertical shift here. So we start negative 2 units from the midline. So from our midline here, we start negative 2 units below. At 2 pi, that's where it's going to end up, negative 2 units below the midline. And at pi units or pi radians, it would be 2 units above the midline. And then hit the midline midway between. And it's symmetric with the y-axis, so we reflect each point over the y-axis. Sorry, I never finished this over here. What is the range? And if you start with the midline 3, think of Going down 2 from 3 is going to put us at +1. And from 3 up 2 would bring us to 5. And again, the range is going to be your C value minus the absolute value of A, comma, your C value plus the absolute value of A. Number 4, determine the range of each of the following trig functions using interval. Exercise number 4, determine the range of each of the following trig functions using interval notation. So our range is C plus or minus the absolute value of A. You need to memorize that. A is 7, C is 4. In the equation, y equals 7 sine x plus 4. So remember, think of the 4 as your midline, and the 7 is how high above and below the midline your maximum and minimum point is. So if we're at 4 and we add 7, we'll be at 11. And if we're at 4 and subtract 7, we'll be at -3. So we want to take C plus or minus the absolute value of A. 4 plus or minus 7. 4 plus 7 is 11. 4 minus 7 is -3. So bracket -3, comma 11. Does the order matter? Yes. The lowest number needs to be written first, right? Range is low to high. Y equals -5 cosine x plus 2. A is -5, C is 2. Again, so if you think of the midline 2, and from the midline of 2, if we go up 5, add 5 to it, we're at 7. From the midline 2, subtract 5, we're at -3. C plus or minus the absolute value of A. Keep writing that. That's the formula that gives us the range. 2 plus or minus the absolute value of -5, which is simply 2 plus or minus 5. 2 plus 5 is 7. 2 minus 5, -3. -3, comma 7 in brackets. C, y equals 25 sine x plus 35. Pause the video, do it on your own. A is 25, C is 35. Again, from the midline of 35, I want to add 25. That's going to bring me to 60. From the midline 35, subtract 25 brings us to 10. So 35 plus or minus 25. Adding 25, 60. Subtracting 25, 10. Our range is bracket 10, comma 60. Exercise number 5, the graph below shows a sinusoidal curve of the form y equals a sine x plus c. Determine the values of a and c. Show how you arrived at your results. Formulas you have to know. A is equal to the max minus the min divided by 2. C is the average, right? It's the midline, it's the middle. So the average of your max and min. So max plus min divided by 2. Memorize these, as well as memorize the formula for finding the range. Well, what is our max and our min? Our max is 22, and our min is 6. So our midline is the average. It's got to be in the middle of these two. So 22 plus 6 is 28 divided by 2 is 14. So I did C first, sorry about that. So C equals 22 plus 6, 28 divided by 2, 14. C equals 14. Well, if I know that our midline here is 14, then if we're at 14, what do we have to add to 14 to get 22? Right, 8. That's another way of getting A. Otherwise, going back to the formula here, our max 22 minus our min 6 divided by 2. 22 subtract 6 is 16 divided by 2 is 8. So A equals 8, C equals 14. So let me just add to the bottom of this. The range, the formula for range, is C plus or minus the absolute value of A. All three of these formulas you have to memorize. So write them down a couple of times, at least 3 times on a separate sheet of paper. Highlight them, commit them to memory. So before you start your homework on page 374, write down those 3 formulas. A equals max minus min divided by 2. C equals max plus min divided by 2. And the range is your midline C plus or minus the absolute value of A. Keep in mind here before you start this homework, and I'm not sure if I told you to cut a color code, but I'm going to do blue. Where's my red? Red and green. Back to purple. Keep in mind that our sine graphs are going to start on the midline. They will start on the y-axis on the midline, and the midline is the y value is C. So it would start at the point 0, C. Whereas cosine graphs start off the midline. Somewhere on the y-axis, and that somewhere is going to be the x-coordinate of 0 and the y-coordinate of C plus A. So just to get you started with the first problem of the homework, the first thing you always want to do is draw the midline. So y equals 4 sine x plus 2. I'm going to take my blue pen and draw the midline. This is A, this is C. So our midline is y equals 2. Just, again, all these little things you can write down. Please do so. It's going to help you to remember if you write it down on paper. So sine is going to start at 0, 2, right here. One complete sine cycle is going to end at 2 pi, 2, and at pi radians, it's going to be on the midline. Now, with midway between 0 radians and pi radians it's going to rise up 4 above the midline. So I count from the midline up 1, 2, 3, 4. And between pi and 2 pi, I want to count down 1, 2, 3, 4 from the midline. And then remember, sine is symmetric with the origin. So let me get these 3 points first. And then count 1, 2, 3, 4 down from the midline and 4 up. And if you haven't already, please change the numbers on our radian scale here. This is correct. This is pi over 2, pi. This is 3 pi over 2, 2 pi. This is negative pi over 2. This should be negative pi. Negative 3 pi over 2 is correct, and this should be negative 2 pi. And make the same changes with the bottom grid. Pi over 2 is correct. Pi is correct. This should be 3 pi over 2. 2 pi. This should be negative pi over 2, negative pi, and negative 2 pi. Okay, thank you for your attention. I hope you have a good day.